Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so excited to get started. We are going to give people another couple of minutes to log on. While folks are joining us, we invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from tonight. I'm Katie. I'm joining from New York.
Michigan, yay!
Massachusetts, Darius, hello.
Oregon, Iowa, British
Ooh.
Columbia,
Arkansas, a lot from Arkansas tonight. Florida, Tennessee, more Michigan. Ooh.
look at, holy moly, Indiana,
New Jersey, Nevada, Pennsylvania, New York, Alabama.
the hand state, yeah, Ariana.
I love that Michigan pride.
Well, it's the easiest thing. Where are you from? Here.
Houston, California. Amazing. We are spanning the country.
Upper Peninsula. All right, Emma. We were just talking about the snow on the Upper Peninsula.
Kristine, did I tell you I was born in Michigan?
No.
Yeah, Holland, Michigan.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a good spot.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Do you still have family there?
I did until a couple years ago. My grandparents moved away, but I do have grandparents in Montgomery, Michigan, which is like right near Indiana, Coldwater, Michigan.
Okay. Yep.
Towards there.
Well, if you're ever in Michigan, you need a place to stay, you just let me know.
Oh, thank you. I would offer the same, but I don't have a house. So.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We will go ahead and get started. This is our third session of the Resilience Through Poetry workshop series sponsored by the New York Life Foundation. We are so thrilled that you're all here. For those of you who have been with us since the beginning, you might remember that we started out on translating your emotions into words with Alexa Russell. Then we talked last week about writing through uncomfortable feelings with Christian Butterfield. And this week for our third and final workshop session, Darius will be talking about exploring emotional imagery. So we've been building on all of the writing that you've been doing, and hopefully you're getting inspired to create something new or build on something you've already been working on. And I do want to remind you all that we are inviting you back again next week to join us for a peer review session. So we'll ask you all to bring what you've been working on. Kristine, Darius, Alexa, and Christian will all be back again. We'll be meeting in small breakout rooms where you can read out your work and get feedback from your peers and any of our illustrious presenters who are passing through your room at the time. So I am going to drop the link in the chat to register for that session next Wednesday on October 26th. You'll be using a different link to join that meeting than the ones that you've used to join this week and the past 2 weeks. So be sure to register if you want to join us for that peer review session. And just a quick reminder about the Scholastic Art Writing Awards. Any work that you've been writing over these past 2 weeks, 3 weeks now, is eligible to be entered in the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. All teens in grades 7 through 12, age 13 and up, who reside in the U.S., U.S. territories and military bases, and Canada are eligible to participate. And works related to grief and bereavement may be eligible for scholarships up to $1,000 with the New York Life Award. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce our guests for today. So you all know Kristine Brickey, who is a phenomenal educator. I deleted the link I wanted to copy. A lifelong educator who is also an author of memoirs and fiction, including They Said She Was Crazy and Flowers for Rodney. Kristine is the founder of KEB's Brick House Studio, where she now leads writing and healing workshops and retreats. And she loves to visit schools and work with teen writers. So we are so thrilled that you're here, Kristine. I just shared the link to Kristine's website in the chat if anybody wants to check it out and check out her books. And I am so excited tonight to also introduce Darius Atefat-Peckham. Darius is an alum of the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. He is also a National Student Poet from the class of 2018. And Darius is now in his senior year at Harvard, where he continues writing with the support of incredible mentors like Tracy K. Smith. And Darius, I will let you share more.
Hey all, thank you all for having me. Thank you, Katie and Kristine, for helping me prepare for this and talking me through my ideas. I also just want to say I love, the camaraderie in the chat and the community you guys have made in the Discord. That's so wonderful that this has yielded, both friendships and just a nice, atmosphere of togetherness, and I'm glad to be part of that. So thank you all. Today we're talking about exploring emotional imagery, and one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently are hauntings. I've been thinking about that both in my work and also just generally. We are in spooky season. My birthday is next week. So growing up, I was always thinking about Halloween and celebration, and for a family in grief, this was a really important time to try to be happy, but also thinking about that word try, thinking about like where is that coming from? Yeah, so as I said, as I was telling Katie and Kristine, my birthday is next week, October 27th. For any astrology people, that means that I'm a Scorpio. I'm sorry. I hope I don't lose too many of you all by admitting this and confessing it. I hope I don't lose all credibility. And I hope you can still learn something from me, truly. But yeah, I was born during spooky season. Growing up, I was convinced I lived in a haunted house. I was like, it was the creepiest house. I really I want to set the scene for you. Like, there were literal monsters in my closet. Like, a bat flew out of my closet door one night, and I was yelling to my dad, I was like, there's a monster flying around. Like, I could see this black, hole in the ceiling. I was like, what is happening? And my dad was like, no, there isn't. Go back to bed. And I was like, yes, there is. But anyways, so that was a thing. And I was also very aware of death and the afterlife growing up. I was a kind of kid who read beneath my covers with a flashlight, so I probably learned a lot of things that too early, as you guys do. And oftentimes as I read, I really did feel like the characters in my books haunted me. I felt like they rose from the pages. I felt like they were friends of mine. They kept me company. They watched over me. They whispered to me, I thought, and they were conjured by my imagination in all areas. They were really I didn't really have imaginary friends that I made myself, but I had my characters in my books. And this happened too when I read my mother's poetry, who I lost when I was a 3-year-old kid. So I had no memories of her, and my perception of her was completely based on her book of poems that she left. And in that way, she sort of materialized as a ghost that I would imagine myself. So you can change the slide, Katie. I'm also going to be saying that quite often. I tried to make the slides kind of spooky as well. I hope that's nice. So I'm gonna be doing a few things, and just as a precursor, please do get some sort of notebook, writing utensil, so that you can both take notes if you want, but also have something to write with when we do our writing exercises. One thing that I'm going to also do is share some of my own work as I talk about things that I engage with, poetic terminology, poetic practice, so that you can kind of have a basis of understanding for where I'm coming from, and how I myself am using this to kind of understand my work and myself So this first poem is a sonnet. It's called Presences, Actions, Scars. But what if ghosts aren't perpetual dying, rather singing? Old bone creaked forward, listening to the summer vegetable shook loose from its soil. Like the upset dirt, most prefer the word spirit, free, untethered. Who would want something like that? Scare me a little. Make me a bit afraid of what accompanies me. What Dad called good fear when I ran to him after a bad fall, knowing it might have ended me. I am good afraid of ghosts. Their presences, actions, scars, their cool fingers conjuring my brow, their tender awareness, and dirge-like mourning for the dead in us. So one of the reasons why I wanted to share that poem was, first of all, it's very recent. I'm working on it as we speak for my thesis. So this is probably not the final version. I don't know. Maybe it will be. Who knows? But another reason is because I think it's a good example of a time when I had to create poetic terminology for myself, something that I can refer back to. I think that can be something. I have a sequence of sonnets called sundered sonnets, which, are prose poems. So they're sort of like a sonnet that like exploded open a little bit. But this is also, this is a more traditional sonnet, and more traditional, right? It doesn't rhyme, but whatever. But it does have the 14-line structure, the volta. And, one of the things that happens within that is there's a kind of reference point for me going forward in my work, which is this idea of good fear. Good fear in the poem. Oh, and you can change the slide, Katie. Thank you. Good fear in the poem is how I think we should approach our hauntings. At the time, I was most presently aware of my hauntings. As I said before, I was living with my single father in a small town called Batavia, Ohio. This was about 4 years after my brother and my mother died in a car accident. To set the scene of that town, in which was built my own private haunted house. There was one elementary school, a small local library, a gas station, and a few other small groceries, but not much else. We lived in a house much too large for us that a friend of my father's allowed us to rent for cheap. And due to the nature of the rental, we literally couldn't make it our own. It felt like a rental. It felt like somewhere where we weren't supposed to really be. And we made it our own the best way that we could, but still, like, the paint peeled and large picture frames that were either empty or filled with strange faces and people that I didn't know leaned up against the walls. I often had nightmares in that house. This sounds awful, but anyways, it was actually a fairly good time in my life, which is surprising. But anyways, yeah, I had nightmares that would take me from my bed. They were night terrors, and I would sleepwalk. And in that way, I sort of became my own haunting. I was afraid of waking up and not knowing what I was doing with my body. And yeah, I sort of haunted. And at that time in my life, a lot of the language directed at me was directly to do with grief. My family often told me that my mother and brother were always with me. They were watching over me as if I hadn't lost anything at all. They'd say that I'd soon see them again, even. And this caused a medley of feelings in me that were difficult to understand and too nuanced for me to explore as a child. As Charlotte Bronte writes in the famous Bildungsroman coming-of-age tale Jane Eyre, children can feel, but they cannot analyze their feelings. Much of the language we use to describe the process of image making in poetry is in some ways paranormal. We conjure description, and sense where to break a line. We evoke feelings and invoke allusions to our favorite long dead or still living writers. A particularly powerful line is one that we describe as stirring or haunting. The presence of ghosts and hauntings are ever present in famous works of literature. Think like Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, or Toni Morrison's Beloved, or even Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. I'm in a Bronte seminar right now, so I'm very big on the Brontes. This is how it ends. I listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. So pretty ghosty. Or even just think of your favorite ghost story surviving in the oral tradition, the first one you heard around a campfire, maybe. The first one that I remember hearing my first ghost story at camp, and then the kid next to me peed his pants and he was so scared. But death for these writers and storytellers isn't an end, but a transitional point. I think that life and death becomes even more blurred in poetry. Now, I know that some of you are probably thinking, silly Scorpio, ghosts aren't real, but I would urge you to think about the fact that we don't relish going to the graveyard at 3 a.m. and hanging out. We might know that ghosts aren't real, but we're not going to take that risk. At the very least, it is our imaginations that haunt us, that animate our ghosts. In her book, Obit, Victoria Chang writes that memory gets up after someone has died and starts walking. Which leads me to my first definition of haunting, or hauntology, which I'll talk more about later in the presentation. That absence which we carry with us and within us, that we animate, the obsessions that worry at our minds, that we are constantly trying to grasp. Naming these ghosts, these hauntings, is what we try to do as writers. Okay, change slide. So a little background, the term hauntology was coined by Jacques Derrida to describe the lasting presence of marks on Western civilization. That is not how I'm using the term, unfortunately. However, he only used the term a total of 3 times in that whole book. So ever since, hauntology has taken on this sort of even haunting quality itself. And it's been taken by different scholars and used in different contexts, because they were very interested in this idea of what would it mean to make a study of haunting? So the definition is never consistent. But one such definition that I'm really interested in is that we are haunted by not only things that happened in the past, but by lost futures. Furthermore, as writers, we try to carry and recover those futures. Okay, you can change slide. So this leads me to our first writing exercise. So please get out pen and paper if you haven't yet. And this might be a bit of a 180, but bear with me. I know I've given you a lot of creepy terminology, scary, terrifying stuff. But now I want you to think about love. Jericho Brown begins one of his poems, "I begin with love, hoping to end there." This is from his book, The Tradition, which I really recommend. It won the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago. I want us to try and begin the same way. Think of an image you witnessed recently that made you experience joy, the warm, fuzzy feeling in your stomach, and try to describe it as best you can. If it proves impossible, you can acknowledge that. Maybe that's why it made you joyful. As Emily Dickinson once wrote, "You cannot fold a flood and put it in a drawer." Crazy line. Try to use simile and metaphor to describe what you're perceiving. Make it full and rich with sensation, with possibility and impossibility. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this initial writing exercise. Katie's going to play some cool music, some ambiance music, atmospheric, but really try to just think of the last thing that made you experience joy and just write it, right now. Just try to get something on the page, try to feel that joy again. All right, well, let's start. Let's stop there. I think we had about 5 minutes, and it was a perfectly timed piano and rain song, which is awesome. Thank you, Katie, for playing that. Yeah, so I hope that that was that sort of got you started on something that we are going to return to. I forgot to mention this. This is the beginning of something that will flourish as we continue this my rambling, I guess. So yeah, you can change the slide. So in a book titled The Hauntology of Everyday Life, psychological anthropologist Sadek Rahimi asserts the very experience of everyday life is built around a process that we can call hauntogenic, and whose major byproduct is a steady stream of ghosts. So as you can imagine by this quote, perhaps there's more truth to what my family was trying to communicate to me, of presences watching over me, always being with me, presences I'd see again. Perhaps ghosts are real in some unknowable capacity. Still, with all these people around me growing up who knew my mother and brother, I resented their sympathies and explanations in some way, mostly just because they had more tangible memories than I did. I think I was jealous. I was a little kid. I wanted their memories. I wanted to be able to recollect this wonderful saint-like person that I never got to experience. This wonderful brother who I always felt at my side, but never really got to show affection towards in my way. And it wasn't until I started thinking about diasporic grief that I understood the usefulness of engaging with this community. You can change the slide. By diasporic grief, I'm talking about, specifically for me, this idea of, I mean, somewhat what Derrida was talking about in his original explanation of hauntology, this lasting presence within a collective unconscious or a cultural past. In the Iranian mystical tradition, I'm Iranian American, that's probably important, especially in Sufism, they practice something called sama, or deep listening. There's even a story about, Rumi, if you've heard of him, one of the most famous poets of all time, walking through a marketplace. And as he's walking, he hears the sound of drums. And in those drums, he hears the call to prayer. So somehow the drums communicated this call to prayer, and that enacted in him this process of deep listening, which led to him publicly whirling, which became known as dervish whirling, which is an ecstatic expression of connection with the divine. When a dervish whirls, they wear tombstone hats you can see in the picture, and they spin their bodies to mimic the earth's turning around the sun. It's really interesting to me that they wear a tombstone above their heads as their bodies move, sort of both as an acceptance and a rejection of death as a finality of the human form. They're actively coming to terms with life and death by enacting the planet's continuance beyond their living bodies. While they do this, in that tradition, they're doing this in order to make a more individual connection with God, which is described as the beloved in a lot of Sufi poetry, and sometimes is misconstrued as an actual beloved romantic relationship. Not what they're talking about generally. Personally, I define the beloved more broadly, and a lot of poets do, including poets like Kaveh Akbar, who's one of my favorites, and I don't know, Tarfia Fazula, Kazim Ali. They define it as a pretty radically inclusive practice of speaking to one's ancestors, people who came before. The beloved, for me, in my work, has taken on all these voices. I think that even within the pretty radically inclusive practice of Sufism, there are those who are left out. So I've hoped to define the beloved for myself as a deep listening to my ancestors or my ghosts. in classical Chinese philosophy, they call their ancestors ghosts and spirits. Okay, you can change the slide. This is the first section of a poem that I'm, or of the sequence that I'm writing that will end up being sort of the heart of my thesis manuscript. But it really is trying to engage with ancestors. Later in the sequence, it's engaging with a pronoun we, of ancestors who are looking down or like experiencing my life from another plane. And here I start with the I. It's called Book of Kin, an Iranian-American hauntology. Dear beloved, when I was small, hiding beneath the skirt of the city's tall buildings and descending lights, my grandfather led us on the walk he made many times to the UN building in his somewhat youth. Our feet fell into place as if following old trails his heels had dug into snow. His unmapped hands crossed behind his back, how he would when he was worried, wrung, unattainable to hold. His occasional nervous glance was the only thing casting a line between us, keeping us in tow. What did he worry might happen? That a man might rise from his shadow on the pavement and take him, standing there, into custody? I used to imagine someone flicking a penny or dime from the top of one of those skyscrapers, someone's indifferent currency splitting the two halves of me in the blink of an eye, lodging its way into the case of my skull, my brain. I can only hope that my body remains, like a building reflecting the water, something I was once proud of, that I'd leave it on good terms and lead my grandson there one day to see it. That like a tower, the eye of me would implode in place, slow as a rotting root, letting free what ghosts reside there. So this sort of enacts the embodiment of our ancestors within us, within me specifically, and sort of breaks open the sequence, to think about that to think about this expanse of voices that made me, that exist within my my tradition or my heritage. And I think that one thing this is trying to do is to resist the I. So it's thinking about the I, but it's trying to resist that fact of it. And that's something I haven't done. One thing that we're taught in poetry is to construct the I, find the I, be personally genuine in our work. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to unlearn recently is how to continue to bring in other voices. So you can change the slide. So in Art as Technique, Victor Shklovsky asserts that art exists that one may recover the sensation of life. It exists to make one feel things, to make the stone stony. The ultimate purpose is not merely aesthetic, but rather to draw out the sensations that things inspire as they are perceived and not as they are known. In other words, the eye is like an ear. We listen with it, and we listen attentively, and we listen in wholly our own unique ways. You can change the slide. Thank you. By this definition, the process of image making is very much like trying to capture a ghost on camera. It's difficult and elusive. We fail time and again to represent real life in our work. Think about maybe how difficult it was to describe that sensation of joy that you felt. Maybe how pleasing it was to relive it in your mind, but how difficult it was to get that on the page. One of the things that we have to think about then is, can that failure afford us new possibilities? If we're failing constantly to describe, then what can we do with that that's productive? We as readers would have never seen or even dared to imagine that image of folding a flood into the drawer. And what Emily Dickinson is talking about in that line is her inability to do it. And then we get to see it, which is incredible. the impossibilities in that statement were as numerous as the possibilities, which is really an exciting thing. When grieving, specifically, we're often called on to fold that flood into a drawer. As poets, especially, this is a difficult task. How does one truncate then express their love and their grief? As Victoria Chang writes in her book Obit, which I've been reading recently as well, in Love, imagination is having to live in a dead person's future. Grief is wearing a dead person's dress forever. So thinking about our inability to commune in the way that we'd like, but also thinking about that Dickinson mindset of like, how do we get there then? Why do we keep trying to do it? As Mark Doty says in his book, Art of Description, don't go in fear. This is a longer quote, bear with me. Don't go in fear don't go in fear of that which has been looked at again and again. Poets return to the moon immemorially. It is deeply compelling, and we probably won't ever get done with it. The challenge is to look at the familiar without the expected scaffolding of seeing. And the payoff is that such a gaze feels enormously rewarding. It wakes us up when the old verities are dusted off, the tired approaches set aside. Essentially, what he's saying is, how do we make an image new? If the Romantic poets existed, how do we add to what they wrote about? How do we talk about an urn again after Keats? That's, this is what we're trying to think about. And I think that within the contemporary space of poetry, a lot of great poets are doing it and really well, and we can too. So this leads us to our second writing exercise with a little ghost dog who is our mascot, who's adorable. I was so excited when I found that. Oh my gosh. Okay. So return to that image that made you joyful and complicated. Introduce something that is impossible to see, something that is characterized by absence, but that haunts our imaginations. What about your life and experience facilitates the joy of what you're seeing? If you described a child playing with their dog, maybe you are stirred to joy by a memory of your own childhood pet, or when you used to be so childlike and carefree. Memory is a good place to go for the second exercise. Mark Doty writes, what is memory but a story about how we have lived? Try to associatively leap into yourself. What more complex emotion haunts that initial one of joy? What lost future? So we're going to do 5 minutes. I'm going over time already, I can tell. So we're going to try to speed through some stuff, but let's do 5 minutes. Okay, I might call our writing session. Hopefully you got started on a more complex emotion, something that you could delve into that was from your own life. Um, you can change the slide, Katie. And I think we're gonna skip my third poem and maybe share it later or not. I think your guys' work is more important for this, so let's keep going and try to get done with the presentation so we can get our a little bit of our third exercise, or at least thinking about it as we leave. So Ross Gay, who is my favorite poet, creates a new etymology for the word delight. He claims that the word delight denotes both something of light and without light. He writes, I will offer a false etymology. Delight suggests both of light and without light. And both of them concurrently is what I'm talking about, what I think I'm talking about, being of and without at once, or joy. He writes that delight springs from feelings of our sorrow and joy concurrently, and that all human perception is colored by this truth within us. If this rings true, that means every image we try to create also has this complex human emotion woven into it. It is the work of the poet to try and access, recognize, and relate that indescribable feeling. Every image is a haunting by the definition of the term. So this is the definition of haunting: poignant and evocative, difficult to ignore or forget, or as I would call it, beauty. You can change the slide. So we're going to jump into our writing exercise, 3 of 3. Woo, we made it. And I think, so I want to mention, earlier I mentioned that Jericho Brown begins his poem, I begin with love, hoping to end there. At the end of his poem, he writes, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there. Instead of something joyful or something sad, I want you to end with hope, not joy or sorrow, but a more nuanced image that further complicates and associatively leaps from the mood of the image or scene you created previously. Both linger in that image and travel elsewhere, allow it to haunt and actively participate in its haunting by describing its nuance with the eye and the ear. In short, attempt to take agency in your own hauntings. So in simpler terms than that, this is something to refer to as you write, but think about it like you had that image that was joyful, you complicated it with something, maybe a memory, and then now you're going to go back to an image that you create yourself, that helps you understand what you're feeling, or it helps you toward understand. So let's do like 5 minutes, then I'll rush the end. We can do Q&A. Do you think that's a good idea, Kristine?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so just so that we can have a little time to do Q&A before you all have to leave. And I can also, I don't know what the rules are, but I can stay a little bit longer if people are interested in asking questions. But you can change the slide. Katie, thank you. Thank you 100 times for changing all the slides. Yeah, so hauntology as a concept helps me understand that hauntings are more complex than just eliciting terror, panic, and anxiety. They're more complex than being real or unreal. In fact, our hauntings make up no more or no less than just what we are obsessed with, the beauty that clogs our brains like leaves in a drain. My grandmother used to say that when my mom visited her, she'd come in the form of a cardinal. Poets help me direct my gaze in service of myself and others like me, my form of prayer, my way of communing, and make me feel less alone. Perhaps Rumi was speaking toward a future generation, your generation, my generation, when he wrote, "Everything I don't know, love will tell you." Change slide. I hope we can be receptive to that love, our hauntings, as they alight in the margins of our sight, read and brief and singing. That concludes my presentation. You can change the slide to the final. Thank you. So thank you all for listening. I hope these writing exercises in my lecture were useful for you. Finally, like poems, as Mark Doty writes, Roske probably wrote this too. I don't know. Everyone wrote everything. Have the ability to be more miraculous than any ghost. They are an intervention in reality committed by the power of art. And that's what we're talking about here. The power of art to make us understand ourselves and understand others. So thank you all for being with me.
So we have questions. Don't think they haven't been asking questions.
I'm sure they have.
Before
I would question me.
Before I give you the first one, I just want to say that I am not a Scorpio, I'm a Virgo, and I completely believe in the spirits and the connections that we have with people. In fact, that's what they said she was crazy really is about the connections that the mother has with her son after she's gone. And I have connections with my son and my brother who I lost, and I feel them. And my house was originally built in 1868. So we definitely have that kind of haunting going on here too. But see, there was an anonymous question earlier that asked, what is your process of writing a poem? How do you decide on the structure and the phrases to best articulate your ideas?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it's really hard also to answer. Part of why it's a good question. You know, every writer has their own process. For me, like on the surface level, like routine is really good. I get up early in the morning. First thing I try to do is read some poems by a great poet. So right now I'm reading a book called Bluest Nude by Ama Kajo, which is really incredible. I just finished up Obit by Victoria Chang, and that always gets my mind thinking about poetry, gets it to a poetic space instead of just starting and beginning dry. And I think in terms of like structure and form, I think that comes later. I think you have to really, for me at least, if I start out saying I'm going to write a sonnet, no, I'm not. There's no way I'm writing a sonnet if I think I'm writing a sonnet. So I think that I do end up writing them. But, you know, more so I think I lean on form and structure as a way of continuing the poem forward, seeing what possibilities lie within the internal rhyme, the internal structure that I've created. So first, I think a really good thing is to notice the repetitions that you're creating within your own voice. Notice what the poem is asking of you as you move forward, and then if there's a form that fits that works with that, you know, if you're trying to name yourself, maybe try a puzzle. You know, try if you see some internal rhyme that could be placed at the end of lines productively, maybe a sonnet. You know, I think that if there's a big tonal shift, you're looking at a volta, right? Maybe a sonnet form would be useful, or if maybe you think you're rambling and you need some constraint, one of those forms might be helpful. So that's about traditional form. I think in terms of just writing process, writer's block is a real thing, I think. And I also think that it's the best way to combat it is to read. Don't keep trying to force something that's not coming. Just try to be natural about it. And if it's not a writing time, it's a reading time.
Okay. Another interesting question, I thought this was from Simra, asks hope I'm pronouncing this right. Any Sufi poet recommendations? My grandfather and father find Shari to be very important with connecting to our religion of Islam, and I want to sort of build that same connection.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Sufi poetry that I love, I don't think you can really get better than so there's I'm learning Persian, but for people who don't know Persian, there are some great translations. And I'd also like to point towards not necessarily Sufi poets, but Sufi poets or poets who engage with Sufism in an interesting way. I think that obviously Rumi is amazing. There's a translation called Gold that just came out with New York Review Books. I'm blanking on the translator, but it's so good. I have it up there.
Oh, I was going to say, are you just...
Yeah,
I'm hoping there's books up there that you're looking at, not just,
this guy, this book, incredible. And the translator, I'm going to really butcher the name, but Haliliza Ghaffori. And it's a really beautiful translation. I think it really brings Rumi into the contemporary sphere in a really interesting way. I think that Saadi obviously is amazing. Hafez, Divuna Hafez is one of my favorite texts. I really love, if you're running in an Iranian poet, Farrukhzad is amazing. And she is really important right now with what's going on in Iran with the women's movement and really the all-out revolution that's happening there. And I think that, yeah, go read Farrukh, I'd say first. And the translations that I think are really good are by Shole Wolpe. There's a book called Sin. And then, another Sufi poet, master poet is Attar, and she has a translation of Conference of the Birds that I think is really good. Also learn, if you're interested in engaging with these texts, learning Persian is a great thing to do. And also just hearing it, if you can find some videos of, an Iranian storyteller or a Persian storyteller reading them, just hearing the music of those poems and this is what I was talking about, is this deep listening, this practice of engaging with music in order to engage with art and the divine. Listen to them read it, because it's insane. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to learn Persian in the first place. It's so beautiful in the original language.
Shreya asked, and you've talked about this a little bit, but asked, what is your writing process? But this was the newest part, I think. Do you write a piece in a sitting or over several months?
Oof. So Presences, Actions, Scars, that poem was a sitting. A long sitting where I didn't do stuff I was supposed to do and sat and wrote that poem. And I think that it happens, it's a variety for me. I mean, that one of the reasons why I resist saying that a poem is finished is because 7 months could go by and I realized that there's a line that absolutely has to be transplanted from a poem that I thought was complete to another poem, and then the rest of that poem goes, or something like that. Poetry is really fluid, I think, as a genre. I think as one that you can write as well. It seems, I mean, even if you're writing a novel, right, you're moving things, you're trying to, and if your voice is consistent across poems, you're going to find that a lot of lines work in other poems. So you don't want to get too, crazy with it, but you do also want to think about, how am I referencing myself? How am I creating a canon that is my voice within myself, and then like how do how does that necessitate maybe revisiting poems 8 months later that have been in the drawer.
That's an interesting idea, Darius, that your voice throughout your work, once it becomes really solidly yours, that you could take a line from one poem and add it, like you can feel how they fit together like that. I hadn't thought about that before. I mean, obviously, even with any type of writing, I always feel like until it's actually printed somewhere, it's up for change. I could read something, I could read my books now and go, oh no, I could change this.
Yeah.
But
even for me, I have a chapbook. It's called How Many Love Poems. It's out. And a lot of those poems right now are getting wrecked, which is crazy, as this experience of being like, okay, I thought that poem was finished in that collection. And then now I'm revisiting and I'm thinking like, how do I better serve this manuscript that I'm writing right now? Versus that sequence that was a smaller collection. And that's something that I think that you learn as a writer with mentors. And luckily for me, I have Tracy helping me, which is useful. But yeah, you'll find those people, those readers who you really believe in and trust. And then I think showing them is a really big thing. Like trying to like see what they think. And if they're one of the readers that you trust, they're not going to tell you to, to completely shift your tone or your voice or something. But yeah.
And don't you think partly that's just, I think, an inherent quality of writers, that we always feel like it's not good enough. It still needs work. I think that's what I saw in a lot of my students, and even in myself, in my adult writing groups. There's so much of that self questioning and how do I know when it's good, or things like that. So we're getting other questions. Katie, what do you?
I can say.
Yeah, up to you too, if you're happy to stay on.
Sure.
Yeah, no worries.
And I don't know if you're comfortable answering this, but I like at least part of this. This was an anonymous attendee. It says, what are your views on Iran's revolution? Do you think writing poems about it is a good idea?
That's a difficult question. I am not afraid to say that I am completely in support of the protests and revolutions that are going on in Iran. Likely one of the only ways that I will be able to go there myself is if this succeeds. I think that what we're looking at is an incredibly progressive set of demands, and in fact, it's a complete revolution. It's in the sense of the term, and I think I'm hoping that yields something really beautiful for the country. It's awful that what's going on in order to get there. My personal belief about, so that gets into like some questions about the public poem versus the private poem. I've been talking a lot about the private poem today, but I think that the public poem is also important. Public poem would be something that faces outward, that thinks about politics, sociopolitical issues, also, in a lot of contemporary cases, like thinking about oppressed and minority voices. And I think that one of the things I think about with this specific revolution is I think that it's noble to make the attempt if you feel called to do so, to write about it. But I need a little more time, I think, to process how it's affecting my family. I think that right now for me, it's like I'm called to consider the history that led up to this, and then also what my place is as an Iranian in the diaspora, and an Iranian man in the diaspora, instead of, and like really explore that for myself, instead of like, especially like thinking about publication right now, or of that. But I do think that, you know, expressing solidarity in any way, and that can be through poems, is a good thing. So
do you have a number of people are asking if you have a favorite poem that you've written?
Oh man, I don't like myself. Just kidding. No, I think it's important, you know, this gets to another larger point. I think it's important to write poems that you like. I think, like, if you're not writing poems that you like, but that you think are good, you're writing for someone else in a way that's not productive. And you know, you can write for other people in ways that are productive, but that specifically, yeah, it's important to like your own work. I think we're always striving for it, to like figure out, do I actually like this? You know, if I like, you know, am reading these amazing poets all the time, you know, it's impossible to not compare yourself to them, and to think like, so I think that's a big thing for me, is like, just try to enjoy poetry and not compare too much, because what you want is to create a poetic lineage of sorts, and take ideological and like poetic, you know, processes from poets that you love and apply them to your own work, instead of thinking, oh, like, I'm not Ross Gay, or and so I'm not good, you know, why am I doing this? Or like,
so the question though was, do you have a favorite poem that you have written?
My favorite poem that I've written, I think that I like that sequence I read the first part of. I think all the three poems that I read today, or I was going to read the third one, I think I really like those poems. And yeah, I'm coming to the I guess the realization that I do like some of my poems, and that's okay. And I think that my
you should like them.
Yeah, you should like your work. I think it's okay to be like, I remember Marcus Wicker came to Interlochen. He's a poet who wrote Silencer. He came to my high school, and he wrote the book Silencer. It's an amazing book. Absolutely brilliant. I recommend it to everyone. But he read a poem, and we were just trying to be very respectful. And so we didn't like clap or snap or anything. And he was like, you can clap for that one. That's a good poem. Yeah. And it like taught me something. I was like, okay, like that's that can be, you know, that can be okay to really believe in your work and be confident. And it didn't feel cocky at all. It felt like, you know, he wrote something that he was proud of and wanted us to know that, but not necessarily like, and also break open the room. It was like, we were so nervous and like
overwhelmed.
He just made us feel comfortable. And that was awesome. So
Cassidy is asking, how do you find the words to name your work?
How do I find the words to name to the title? Like, I think, yeah, maybe I'll think about titles. Okay, so when I was thinking about good fear as terminology that I arrived towards, I think that the inclination to me was to call the poem Good Fear or Good Afraid or something like that, which wasn't the right title. And I think that for me, it's a process of, oh gosh, honestly, for me, I am terrible at titles. Like if you buy the chapbook, if you read the chapbook, every poem is titled, here's a love poem to, like The Garden Snail, or here's a love poem to, and that was a total cop-out. And I'm trying to like get better at writing titles, but I did like the emphatic, like, here's a love poem to this thing, you know, and it's a lot of poems to my grief. So it was like giving, like, it felt good to write them. But now I'm thinking, like, how can a title really offer the poem into a different realm of thinking? Or how can it change something about the poem? So I think the title I'm thinking of more as an extra line in the poem, or it rather than like a compiling of what the poem was about. So instead of like, you know, if you write a poem about like a guitar, instead of calling it like guitar, calling it something else that that helps.
It kind of it sets for your readers the idea or the tone that you're kind of going for with that poem?
Yeah. So like, I think that, so like there's this Ross Gay poem that's titled Overheard. And I really like that because it directs us towards this line that he's overheard, but the whole poem surrounds that line. And he's obviously like, he's not just thinking about that. It's like all this other stuff. So it's like, he's almost like reconfiguring the way that we're thinking about what he's thinking about, as something that's overheard for the reader rather than like just the poet overhearing something, you know. So it's like the poem, like titles like that really, or like James Wright's like A Blessing is like, seems really simple as a title, but the blessing therein, you know, is really complex. And like, even on the word level, it's like, you know, that's one of the poems that I point to for this very assignment, that I was like talking about during the lecture. And that it like, he ends the poem, I break into blossom. And it's like, you think that the I break is going to be like into tears or something, like something else. It's like blossom, you know. So it does a lot of unexpected things, within the line level, on the line level.
All right, I think the last question we'll have to wrap it up is, people are wondering, more specifically about you. Did you because you mentioned Interlochen, and they're wondering if you went for camp or for high school,
Oh yeah.
and then what are you studying at Harvard?
So I went to Interlochen. This is a funny story. I thought I was applying to camp, and then I actually was applying to high school, which changed my life.
Oh my
Completely.
goodness.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, no, that was like the first productive mistake I made, I think. Like failing into success or something. But no, it was like, yeah, Interlochen was a great school. I went there for 2 years from junior to senior year. And yeah, I studied creative writing there. And then I applied to a bunch of schools. I didn't think I was wanting to go to Harvard at all, or that I was going to get in at all. I was thinking more like a small school like Middlebury College or something. Tufts I really liked. I was also thinking about big schools as like a challenge, I guess. I'm glad I didn't do that because I'm too shy and like awkward for that. But yeah, I got into Harvard and then like felt kind of like gotta go. So I went and ended up finding a really good poetry community here. So I worked with Jory Graham to begin with, who is like titan of poetry, like just absolutely on another like plane. I worked with her for 2 years. I worked with Josh Bell, and then now I'm working with Tracy on my senior thesis, which is a collection of poems. I really, you know, honestly, like my first year, I might not have recommended Harvard for poets, but now I do. I think everybody like definitely apply, because I don't think you're going to get a better like big three poets, you know, than Josh Bell, Jory Graham, and Tracy K. Smith. I just like, it's even hard for me to like, I'm applying to MFAs right now, and for grad school, and it's just like, sheesh, you know, it's like it's hard to find a faculty that is as good as this one. So I think that that's something to think about. Also, Harvard doesn't have an MFA, so you get direct contact with these professors. So it's not grad students usually who are teaching. You know, I got a lecture course by Tracy. I was in a workshop with Tracy. So it's a really good, it's a good place. And then Interlochen as well. Oh my gosh, definitely recommend Interlochen. We either for camp. I've heard like way better, like insanely positive things about camp. So I definitely recommend camp, at least if you're thinking about it. I've never been.
So you accidentally got into Interlochen. I'm imagining people that have applied there and didn't get in, and the angst they will have with you accidentally getting to go to high school there. That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Interlochen it's pretty, I think that they want, you know, they want they're looking for people who are really excited about their art and that really want to improve and like want to make you know, and it's also just, it's becoming a school that's really well received by colleges anyway. So even if you don't want to do art for the rest of your life, it's just a good place to go if you ever want to just have a little snippet of it. It is a tundra though, so beware.
A tundra.
Yeah, it is. It just is. I used to describe it like I was Batman going into the caves on the mountains to learn how to like, I don't know. And then I came back and I was weathered and like I had a beard all of a sudden and that was
and Michigan State's campus, there's actually a section we call the tundra because it is wide open and the wind hits you and you think you're going to die before you get into the next building. So
yeah.
Katie,
also
I
noticed,
think
sorry, I just noticed someone mentioned Hanif Abdurraqib, and please read that writer. Absolutely one of my favorite writers of all time as well. Especially his essay collection, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, and the newest one as well. And the poems like are insane. He was just in Poem a Day. I don't know, like if you guys are like, you should also subscribe to Poem a Day. And the last poem that he wrote for Poem a Day is like, just every new poem is like one of my favorite poems by him. So thank you for mentioning his name. So anyway.
Well, that was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Darius and Kristine. Just a reminder to everyone to please join us next week for our peer review session. I'm dropping the link in the chat again. You will need a different Zoom link to join us, so be sure to register if you want to come. Kristine will be there, Darius, Alexa, Christian, the whole crew really is back again. And
the whole gang will be together.
Yeah, for the first time ever.
For the first time.
We're all going to be there and we are so excited to meet with you in these smaller groups. Please come prepared with a piece that you are ready to share. If you're not prepared to share your piece as it is yet, that's okay. You can talk about a concept that you're working on. This is really just a space for you to have an audience to give you feedback on wherever you are in your process for writing this next work. We will also go over how you can enter that work in the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. So please be sure to join us if that's something that you're interested in. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Kristine. And a huge thanks to my colleague, Sumin Huang, who has been answering questions all day in the Q&A box. It has been such a pleasure. Thanks to all of you for joining us and for all of the energy and inspiration that you brought tonight. What a way to end a Wednesday.
Awesome. Excellent. I know, right? Darius, you're amazing.
Oh, you guys are amazing. And everybody, I was reading little bits of your poems. I'd love to read them all somehow. I don't know if that's a possibility, but so beautiful. And just makes me so happy when people can get some writing out of my rambling. So
thank you all. Have a great night and see you next week.